All right, good evening, everybody. It's Nate G here, along with Dr. Doug Lisle with the Beat Your Genes podcast. Dr. Lisle, how are you doing this evening?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good. Actually, yesterday it made me think of something evolutionary psychology related. I was watching Game 7 of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And in this game, Las Vegas, the Golden Knights, they had won. So it's a best-of-7 series for the first round. And the Vegas Golden Knights were up 3-1 on the San Jose Sharks. And the San Jose Sharks had clawed their way back to have it tied 3-3 for games. So this is Game 7. It's like one of the most important games for teams in a playoff. And this is now 10 minutes left in the game. The Vegas Golden Knights are up 3-0 to goals. And then what happens is the captain of the San Jose Sharks team takes a hit, gets a cross-check, and loses consciousness. And everybody's scared for his life. He's laying motionless on the ice. And he eventually gets up. The trainers help him, and he goes back to the locker room. Then what happened actually is going to make NHL history. Is the San Jose Sharks, they had a 5-minute major penalty, which means, so in hockey, if the team gets a penalty and they score, then the penalty is erased and they start over. But in a major penalty, if you score, then they keep going. Well, the San Jose Sharks, in the span of a 5-minute penalty, scored 4 goals. And the Vegas Golden Knights scored another to tie it up. They go to overtime, and San Jose ends up winning the game. Incredible moment in history. And I'm thinking of evolutionary psychology and thinking, gosh, I bet Dr. Lisle doesn't care about the story at all because it's hockey, not basketball.
That is correct. I'm like, really? They're called the Golden Knights. Oh, wow. I guess that comes from the Golden Nugget Casino that's there in Vegas or something. Golden Knights, Nithghght. Yeah, whatever. All right. Well, it's a nice little story there, Nate. Not that I care.
Goodness, it's a very, very, very interesting night for sports fans of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but not for Dr. Lisle.
Sure.
Anyway, Dr.
You
Lisle,
got it.
We've got some questions today about different personality characteristics and how they manifest with different emotions and different thoughts and feelings. So we're going to get right to it. We've also have a caller on hold, as Brian, I believe. Brian, hang on hold for a little bit. We're going to take a couple of questions from the listeners through email, and then we'll get to you. So Dr. Lisle, let's start.
All right.
Dear Dr. Lisle, I'm interested to know from an evolutionary psychology point of view why some people have a really hard time doing things for themselves and feel like they must always put others first. Why does it feel morally wrong and guilt-inducing to these people to do things for themselves, such as have fun, exercise, rest, and generally take care of their own needs? Is this all about signaling agreeableness or conscientiousness, perhaps?
Yes, that's exactly what's going on. So you're describing somebody that is high in conscientiousness and probably also in agreeableness in this case. And so those two characteristics, when they go together, these are all it takes is one other thing. Like if you happen to be like really not smart at all and you have these two characteristics, then you'll be a very helpful person, but people won't be seeking you out and trying to grab you by the sweatshirt and drag you into their life. But if we add just even a reasonable amount of intelligence, it doesn't have to be fancy, just a reasonable amount, you have the characteristics that I call the sucker triad. So the foundation of the sucker triad is agreeableness and conscientiousness. It means that if you have any ability at all to go with it, then this makes you a very valuable target for other people, because all they have to do is to get in front of you and pitch you on something that they want you to do, and because you're agreeable, you'll probably agree to it. And if you're conscientious, you will follow through. And if you've got any ability at all, they've come to you because they know that you're probably capable of doing whatever X is, and so now you're stuck with it. And what's happening is that, as this person describes, the sort of guilt and tension that goes along with being a Sucker Triad award winner. What happens with this is that you are a really valuable resource. It's basically like they're looking on a bush with a bunch of people there, but those are just green leaves, and then you're the little blackberry that's under the leaf. It's like, now we got something of value. This person is worth trying to pressure and get to do what it is that I want them to do, because they're probably going to do it. They're going to follow through. They're probably going to do a good job, etc. And they probably can do it. So this is the very high value of agreeable, conscientious people. Their fate. Now, what happens is a really cool thing happens in life when you are a Sucker Triad person, is that people will pat you on the back and say they really like you and value you, and sometimes they're irritated because you're already so overburdened with things that you're doing for other people that you just have this harried look to your life, and you have to try to say no. And then they get angry, and then you go ahead and say yes. And so what goes out the window is you disappoint the one person that you can disappoint without getting anybody mad, which is you. So any plans you had to take an art class or to take a yoga class or to just sit down and read a book or watch some cool show on television, that's out the window. There's no personal enjoyment or personal development for you, because you are actually handling all of the tasks being assigned to you by the pushy people. Now, the good news is that as your life goes on, what will happen towards the end of your life is that they'll sometimes do this for you right before you pass away, is that there'll be a special ceremony where some people will come together and hold the ceremony for you. And they'll give you a medallion, a medal. On this medal, it will have the big script S on the front, and it'll have your hypothesized, dates of, you have your name and your dates of how long they think you're going to live, when you were born and when you're going to die. Really cool thing. And the S, everybody tells you that the S means super, like you were this super person. But actually, it means sucker. So this is what I call the sucker medallion. And on the back of the sucker medallion, it lists the people, the individuals, and the institutions that you sacrificed your life for. So this is what this person is referring to is sucker medallion winners now, or people that are on their way to winning a sucker medallion. Now, what causes this? Well, it causes this is caused by being an outlier on a couple of dimensions with respect to the Big Five. Whenever we start to see people that are outliers on the Big Five, we start to see unusual personalities with unusual challenges. So, for example, if you're very disagreeable and you're very low in conscientiousness, you're a psychopath. So that's, you're going to run into trouble with the law. This is just how your life's going to be full of contentious problems. And if you're a male, they're very likely to be violent problems and legal problems, and you can't help yourself. That's just how you're built. If this person is describing a sucker medallion future recipient, and there's some things that we try to do about this. So on my website, I have I have a series of little audios, and one of them is probably how to get out of it. And it's also I discuss this in a video that's on my website called Success Forces. So what we're trying to do is get out of things if we're one of these people. And there's some skills that you can learn. You'll never change your personality, but you can, in fact, learn some specific skills. You're kind of like a really introverted person that hates public speaking, but goes to a public speaking coach and then learns how to actually manage to get through the ordeal if you've got to give a speech. And so there's things that you can do to make you more effective. Well, there's things that you can do to make you more effective if you are, if you've got the sucker triad working against you. So on my website are things like strategy is, we always tell people, oh, I wish I could, but I can't. And then there's a way that we explain why it is that we can't do whatever it is that they want us to do. We blame Big Louie all the time. So we always blame somebody else. Never take responsibility for this. Always blame somebody else. It's always some other reason that there's some other force. But what we most specifically try to do is to not be specific about why it is that we can't do what other people want us to do. We have other things that are just that we have to take care of, and we don't have any choice because we've made promises to other people. So we wish we could help. We just can't do it. And when they say, well, how am I supposed to handle this? Where am I supposed to go? What we then do is we recognize this as a very, very slick trap. And what this is that the individual who might have been 6'4" and 280 pounds and 55 years old and dominant personality who is trying to push you into doing something, and you say, i.e., some big snarling boss, and you're the secretary that's been pushed around by this guy for the last 16 years. And what you're going to say is, oh, I wish I could stay late and work on this project for you. Mr. Johnson, I really wish I could, but I can't. Why? Because there's just something that I have to take care of at home. Well, what is it that you have to take care of? Oh, it's just something that I have to take care of. And we send them in a circle. It's just something that I made a promise and I have to take care of. Well, who did you make a promise to? Oh, it's just something I got to deal with. So we don't tell them specifically. And the reason we don't tell them specifically is if we tell them specifically, they're going to contradict us. They're going to say that is not a legitimate reason. So we are not going to give them the satisfaction of being able to directly contradict us because we're not going to tell them what it is. And then if they're continued pushing us, it basically says, well, what am I going to do about this? What they're doing then is they're shifting the nature of the conversation from adult to adult to child to parent. So they are essentially saying, you're in charge of this outcome for me. I'm like a child. I need help. Okay. And what it does is that stokes parental altruism, which is a very easy thing to stoke in somebody that's a sucker triad victim. So that's why what we're going to do is we're going to shift that moment back to adult. And what we're going to say are things like, I don't know, but you'll figure it out. You'll work it out. And in doing that, we suggest to them that we have not taken the bait. These things are not being done consciously by the people on the other side of these equations. They are disagreeable, manipulative instincts that live on the other side, and we have to be consciously acquiring techniques to maneuver around these instincts if you're going to defend your existence. So that's the story of our question, and the reason why you've got the problem is because you happen to be have the genetics that have led you to be both agreeable and conscientiousness at the same time. And that means that you are pretty defenseless unless you put up some barriers, and you could learn how to put those barriers up and defend some of your time in your life.
Absolutely fascinating. So to the people who say, oh, well, why can't you just be direct and say no? That's just disagreeable people who have no problem doing that.
Exactly. It's always hilarious if you read these books like When I Say No, I Feel Guilty, or et cetera, all these Your Perfect Right by Alberti and Emmons, which is the classic in the field of assertiveness training. It's obvious that the people that wrote them are disagreeable. So it's like of course, they would have had no idea about the Big Five. They would have had no idea that these are intractable personality conditions of the organism. So all they see is they see people getting run over, and they're like, hey, just speak up. Actually, one book was called like Stand Up, Speak Up, and Talk Back. Like that was the name of the book, some bestseller 30 years ago. Yeah, this is a joke. Okay, this is never going to work, and it's not going to work because personalities aren't subject to change. All that you can do is you can get skilled at specifically preparing for these types of moments, and then get better at, up your batting average, which your batting average is probably 0 now, but you can get your batting average up to, 30 or 40 or 50%. And every time you get away with one of these deals and get out of something that you almost always would have done in the past, and you actually didn't get out of it because your mother's in the hospital dying of heart disease, you actually got out of it with a slick maneuver, you will feel cloud nine. You'll feel like you just, like you robbed from Fort Knox. It's like, oh my God, how did I get away with that? And the way we can get away with it is stands on these principles that I outline, like I said, on my website and Success Forces and some of those audios. But this is the notion here of, this is how we must go about defending our time.
It's kind of like getting a tax refund. The money was always yours to begin with. You're just getting it back. This time about time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Very good. Yeah.
All right. Well, so Dr. Lisle, what is the personality type of someone who has body issues? For example, someone who is very particular about their weight to a point that if they gain a few pounds, they start to hate themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing hyper-conscientiousness there, and we're going to see hyper-conscientiousness, sort of can float into what we might call obsessive-compulsive characteristics. And and so we're going to find out that obsessive-compulsive characteristics are not only is that characteristic itself inherited, but it's also true that the types of things that people are obsessive about are also inherited. So, there are people that are, it's not uncommon for example, someone who is anorexic to have a grandmother who is also anorexic, or a mother, etc., or a sister. So we're going to find that that this kind of physical presentation hyper-conscientiousness is going to be, obviously people, if you think about this, that people are naturally concerned with their self-presentation. So you can then imagine a bell curve where there are some people who are not concerned about their self-presentation at all, and there's people that are extremely concerned about their self-presentation on the other side, with most people in the middle. So we could recognize that people with no concern for their self-presentation, these are not enlightened people, okay? These are highly dysfunctional people. They're either dysfunctional mentally, physically, or both. So this is there's something badly wrong with an individual that is not concerned about their appearance and self-presentation to the world. On the other hand, you can imagine that someone who is obsessively worried about how it is that they look and is terribly critical about this, you can imagine that also is crippling and very dysfunctional. So the world, most of us land somewhere in the middle, and I would say that most of us are pretty damn self-critical and pretty damn worried and concerned and somewhat anxious, et cetera, about our appearance. That is situation normal for the species, is to be always kind of, have some baggage, have some essentially competitive voices in there worried about our self-presentation. That would make sense. In other words, don't slack off on that, on your grooming processes and your self-presentational processes, because your competitors won't. So whatever percentile you're at, if you're an 8 or if you're a 3, the truth is that your competitors have embedded within them an anxiety for self-presentation that's going to cause them to be doing a pretty good job of putting their best foot forward most of the time. So if you don't have that very same characteristic, you're going to be outcompeted by individuals who are more sufficiently anxious. So the average human is relatively anxious, fairly concerned about their self-presentation, and is moderately worried about it, which is why fashion is such a big deal that it is, and for females, why makeup is such a big deal the way it is, and etc. So it's not. So you can start to see that if the midline of the human nervous system is pretty self-absorbed there on this dimension, then 75th percentile is getting pretty uncomfortable. Okay, and 85th percentile is more uncomfortable still, and 95th percentile is getting downright fanatical, and 97th percentile is now doing a lot of suffering. And so you can see how this would work. So a person could be otherwise their mind could be very functional and not really that odd, and maybe they're somewhat fastidious and somewhat anxious and somewhat perfectionistic, but it just so happens that they get a self-presentational circuit along with their generally high anxiety that happens to be particularly focused on that particular set of neural circuits by genetics. And now what have we got? Now we've got somebody that is hyper-conscientious with a lot of anxiety about their physical self-presentation, and they're going to do a fair amount of suffering behind this. So now, all of these life experiences that people have are to some degree context dependent. So they're going to change over time. Now you might say, well, it's probably all going to mellow out as you age. Not necessarily. So my mother, for example, has gotten much worse in this dimension. So my mother was always quite laid back about her self-presentation, always neat and reasonably orderly, but by no means self-absorbed at all. In fact, I would rate my mother's self-absorption with her appearance probably at the 20th percentile for the average female. Today, now, because of Alzheimer's, she is now her natural high conscientiousness, which is characteristic of her personality. That now she is aware that she is old and somewhat infirmed and not that smart, and as a result, she feels less than, and therefore like she has to worry about her worth in the social world. So she is now much more worried about making errors, specifically about her appearance. And so she will ask me repeatedly in any time that I see her and that we go anywhere, do I look okay? Do I look okay? She doesn't, she would never said, do I look good? She just doesn't have that kind of circuitry in there to even think about looking good. She wants to look okay. And she's very worried about looking okay in a way that she was never worried before. So where the person is at in life, what their age and ecological context is going to be a major component of this kind of suffering. However, the basic principles of why a specific individual is particularly hyperconscientious about specifically physical issues is going to be largely a gene-driven phenomenon.
And is there a difference, like for women women tend to be, from what I understand, more aware of
Yep.
this issue and have this issue more than men do?
Vastly more, for a number of reasons. First of all, considerably more of the variance in a woman's mate value is dependent upon her appearance. So that's just obvious for the basic biological reasons that women do not provision men. So if you started out looking at the animal world by basically saying, hey, the animals are just going to glance at some fitness indicators or smells or sounds, and they're just going to pick the one that causes the most lust in me. Okay, that's what goes down in the animal kingdom. But for humans, there's a very important additional assessment that goes on, which is to look inside the minds of the individuals. That's undoubtedly why we can talk as much as we do and can, and in such a sophisticated fashion, that this is a method for actually examining the genetic solidness of the individual's genetic code, as a huge amount of that code is part and parcel of building the brain. So the you can tell that humans' mate value is dominated by vision, just as it is throughout the animal kingdom. But you're going to find out that because in this species we have strong pair bond proclivities in the species, it's going to then be the case that women are a major job of a female is going to be to try to get resources out of males. And so males do not need to try to get resources out of females because they're not pregnant and therefore not vulnerable. So they're not paying nearly the price for pregnancy that a female is. That being the case, male provisioning of offspring is a way for the female organism to essentially get even with respect to investment in offspring. That being the case, therefore, the male's psychology with respect to their mental abilities at getting resources and their personalities with respect to willingness to share those resources, and their conscientiousness with respect to following through on those impulses that they express. All of these things are very important parts of a male's mate value. That being the case, the male doesn't have to worry about the mirror image of that problem. Therefore, the female's mind is not as an important a feature of her sexual attractiveness as the male's is as his. Now, trust me, like I said, it's dominated by vision, but there is a difference. And so that being the case, you're going to find women should naturally be more concerned about their appearance than men should be concerned about their appearance, which is true. And so as a result, this characteristic of hyperconscientiousness about one's physical self-presentation should be found more often in females than it is in males. And that is absolutely the case. It's also exacerbated by the pleasure trap now that arrives in the 20th century that leads to hyperpalatable foods that lead to systematic overconsumption and therefore the gaining of excess fat stores. And those excess fat stores are now going to mimic pregnancy on the female, but not in the male. As a result, the excess fat is going to be more unappealing sexually sitting on a female than it does on a male. And as a result of that is also going to add a lot of anxiety about that problem and concern, particularly for a hyperconscientious individual. So hyperconscientious female, particularly in anything close to mating years, should be more worried about that than the average male is, for good reason. It isn't, quote, societal, it's genetic competition. And so as a result, women are suffering more in terms of their feelings of self-confidence and esteem behind physical self-presentational issues around weight than are men. And there's the reasons for that are straight biological competitive algorithms. So that's a very long-winded explanation and answer to that question.
Well, it's interesting because I was trying to figure out the male counterpart. Women have the quote body issues from hyperconscientiousness. Yeah. So, as a result of the male's desire to feel resourceful, would the signal of conscientiousness from a male be to, for example, wear a lot of cargo shorts or cargo pants so they can hold a lot of things?
No, it would be worrying about rising in dominance hierarchies and making money.
Okay.
It would be achievement. Okay, so males are going to be more concerned about that. They're also going to be concerned about their physical size and strength, but those are going to be somewhat selected for as a Stone Age part of a Stone Age algorithm for females to try to figure out who's going to get and be able to keep resources and therefore be able to share them. But male resource acquisition is complex. It involves trading. It involves social skills. It also involves coordination. It involves cunning. So it involves a lot of things that are associated with intelligence. That's more so today than it ever was before, but it's there. And so males are going to worry about whether they've got enough resources. So they're going to be worrying about that more when they're going to be worrying about that more than the female is going to be worried about that. Female isn't going to be as worried about the fact that she's broke, where a male is going to be a lot more worried about that.
Fascinating. All right, it's time to take our caller. So let's welcome to the show. Brian from Florida, welcome to the show.
Hello, how's it going?
Are you still there? Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah,
good.
we can hear you.
Yep. All right. Fire one ready, Brian.
All right. Well, my question will it dovetails quite nicely, I think, into the last discussion you were having. I was going to ask Dr. Lisle about female promiscuity, and I know it's not common for females to be promiscuous because it's more costly for them, and there is promiscuity when there's a differential in mate values, but there are probably a small number of females that are promiscuous even when there isn't that large differential there. And I was just wondering why that would show up, because evolutionarily it'd be much more likely for those females to get pregnant and be physically disabled and then to starve if the man runs off. So that was my question.
Right. Yeah, very good question. What you're looking at is openness and low conscientiousness. Okay, so you put high openness and low conscientiousness together, and you're going to get a highly promiscuous female. That's going to be a big part of the story. Openness alone, it'd be an interesting doctoral dissertation for somebody who would be, some grad student that's listening now in developmental psychology or personality psychology, that, what are the driving elements of female promiscuity? And those would be where I would look. I would also look at instability. Let me think where else. It's certainly extroversion. So you can picture in your mind a highly open, low conscientious, highly extroverted, and emotionally unstable female. That female is going to be promiscuous. And so that's what you're looking at. So evolution has selected against that, and that's to put those combinations together. Those are going to wind up being low probability combinations that you're going to find, just as a sociopath is a low combination, and just as our sucker medallion is a low, sucker triad is a low. It's there. Our sucker triad person is probably about as uncommon as is a promiscuous female. So it's the same kind of idea. So just openness will get us part of the way there. A lot of women that are more open will certainly have had many more sex partners by the time they are done on Earth than someone who is closed. So that would be one factor. And then if we lower conscientiousness, that's going to be another factor. If we increase extroversion, that's going to be another factor. And if we increase emotional instability, that's going to be another factor. So bit by bit, we build along a probability continuum. This is holding environmental factors constant, of course, and including their own attractiveness would effectively be an environmental factor, because the more attractive they are, the more attractive, appealing opportunities would come their way. Okay, so effectively their own attractiveness is part of their environmental circumstances. It's literally part of the environmental circumstances that the brain sits in, okay? And it influences in the environmental opportunities that come their way. So you can now picture in your mind's eye an unstable, extroverted, low conscientious, high open, highly attractive female. That's a highly promiscuous female. And so it has been selected against by evolution. We can see that in the fact that it's a relatively low probability characteristic that we're going to see in females. And the reason why it's low is those individual elements of those personality characteristics, each one at a time, are relatively low. So very, very good question. Excellent.
Brian, thank you very
All
much
right.
for the phone call. We really appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
All right, Dr. Lisle, we've got another caller on hold, so we're going to welcome caller. What's your name? Thanks for calling, and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Nick from San Diego.
Very good, Nick. All right.
Hey,
what's going on? What can we do?
I had a question for Dr. Lisle. I want to know, why do humans hide when they have sex? Why do they always, go inside, or you can never talk about it? I don't know if there's any other animals that behave that way. And is this a product of evolution or of our modern society?
That's a really good question, and I am not aware of the anthropological. I'm not a student of cultural anthropology, so I don't know what goes on. Somebody knows. I think that what you're seeing about what's mostly been observed is that it's relatively secret. Okay. And I'm not sure exactly why that would be. One reason comes to mind is that human sexuality can be a rather involved situation as opposed to, for example, what happens in chimpanzees. So our closest relative, the sex act is I believe it's 8 thrusts typically on the male. So the entire act is like 8 seconds long and it's done. So it's a very safe act to take place right out in the middle of a clearing if we can't see a predator, because it's over before it starts. Whereas humans are way more elaborate, way longer cycle. It's 15 minutes is very standard, typical. In my case, of course, it's considerably less than that. but the point is that that this is so. So I have a feeling that there's a possibility that it could actually have been dangerous to not essentially be sort of bunkered in and safe in some ways, and therefore not be under potential predator observation. So that's just an idea that I'm having, and I can't back it up. And somebody may write to me and say, "Hey, I've got a PhD in cultural anthropology from Cornell, and you're crazy." And wide open, completely public sexual activity takes place in villages all over the world, etc. I have not heard that, though. So I think that what you're observing in humans is natural for humans to be sort of bunkered in and secure and private. And my guess would be that it would be derivative of making sure that one is safe and secure from predators. That's what I'm guessing.
But do you think is it related to why we wear clothes and hide our bodies? Is that
I don't know. I have somebody has written on the evolutionary psychology of clothing, and that's something that obviously there would be more than one reason for clothes. And so clothes could have been the evolution of the use of clothing could come about from multiple reasons. But I think you're on to some good questions here, and these are things that I haven't considered, and I don't want to act definitive or sure about anything because I don't know.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dr. Lisle.
Very good. All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Fantastic. These are some great questions.
Yes.
All right. So, you had mentioned actually the 2 of our next questions actually have to do with with Brian from Florida, the next question has to do with sociopaths. But then we've got a question that's kind of similar to what Brian was asking. So, Dr. Lisle, this listener wants to know the difference between compassion and empathy and how it relates to sociopaths. And so they're trying to figure out where you draw the line between a sociopath and somebody who just is trying to improve their social skills to the limits. As you said, communication is a way to manipulate other organisms. with this definition, the lines seem blurry.
Well, I'm not sure what they mean by improving their social skills. I think what they really mean by that is maximizing their manipulative leverage. So it's a little different thing. Now, I think that what we're going to see here is that what you call psychopath or sociopath, this is a person, a very disagreeable person with low conscientiousness and therefore very, very low empathy. And the question that's being framed there is, is this, where do you draw the line between that and somebody that's, manipulative but has some empathy, and where is it a sociopath and where it isn't a sociopath? And the answer is that we do a slight disservice to ourselves. We have a cost in the way that we make inferences when we label things. So when we call somebody a borderline personality disorder or a sociopath, we are acting as if this is an infection that the person has, that is, they're that type, okay? But that's a mistake. What people are is they are genetic variations that sit on bell curves. And so it's exactly the same problem that we say, well, Bill is tall. Well, tall relative to whom? Okay, how tall do you mean? 5'9", 6'1", 6'8". If he's an NBA player named Bill and we're saying that he's tall, he's probably at least 6'10". And so if he's just Bill in your grade school class in the fourth grade, he's 5'4". Okay, so these are relative issues. There is no type of a human being you call tall. You're just the word tall is describing a place on a bell curve that you subjectively start to use that term as opposed to some other term. And then you watch yourself using hybrids, like he's pretty tall. Okay? Oh, okay. Well, now I know he's not 7 feet tall. So a person isn't, quote, a sociopath or not a sociopath any more than somebody that is a guy that's 6 foot is, quote, tall. Now you could say, all right, I met a guy that's 7'2". All right, let's face it. We can all agree that that's striking. Well, there's the same thing with sociopaths. You can meet sociopaths that are just absolutely cold-blooded and vicious, at which point you're like, yeah, that thing is way out there on the bell curve of low conscientiousness and disagreeable. That's a super dangerous, uncivilized frickin' animal is what that thing is. So that's where the confusion comes in. So as I've said, a good used car salesman may or may not be a sociopath, but he probably isn't. He's got enough conscientiousness that he's not lying so often that you don't just catch him, within minutes. As he's just telling you one story after the next, reading you and trying to figure out what it is that you want to hear to try to get your name on the bottom line. Okay, so do people like that exist on car lots and in everywhere in the world? Yes, they do. But there's going to be a lot of people that are less conscientious, somewhat disagreeable, and tricky. Willing to trick you, and yet we wouldn't call them a sociopath or a psychopath. We would just call them, a little dangerous. Like, you better watch out. Put your hand over your wallet. Don't get your car fixed by that guy because he's not trustworthy. Okay, so that's the end of the mystery of this question. Is that somebody that you would call a sociopath is low in empathy, low in conscientiousness. They're disagreeable, and but there's no. It is I guess here's the bottom line. Of course, it's a blurry line. These are nothing other than variations on a theme. They're not types.
And Dr. Lisle, is there a difference, or what is the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath?
That's just word usage.
Okay.
They just shifted that word usage from 40 years ago. We call them psychopaths. Now we call them sociopaths.
Okay. Is there an emotional stability component to these labels?
Not necessarily, I don't think. I think that you could be a very stable psychopath. I think that when you get unstable, you're more likely to be explosively dangerous. So that's how that's going to work. Just
Fantastic.
like you can be pretty damn narcissistic, and if you're intelligent and conscientious enough, people they're just gonna know that you're disagreeable and difficult, but you aren't gonna scare people. Whereas if you happen to also be unstable, then we're gonna see these acute reactions out of you that are gonna really disturb people. And the same thing would be true of a psychopath.
Fascinating. All right, one last question here. Dr. Lisle, is there a link between high openness and a reduction in genetic preference? This listener goes on and says, it seems that the people who are highest in openness are the least likely to get along well with their family and the least likely to have kids. The latter is now a choice given the availability of birth control. So given birth control, I'm curious if this means a new societal trend is emerging, whereby highly open individuals are being selected out. And this being a new trend primarily to the availability of birth control, because in the past, the apparent reduction in genetic preference for high openness individuals would have been evened out by their sexual adventurousness.
Yeah, this person's confused. They've just got they've got some exemplar in their head of somebody that they're thinking of, that they're recognizing the openness in that individual, but they're not recognizing they're not recognizing other personality characteristics that are a factor here. Openness is definitely not being selected out in the modern environment. Conscientiousness is being selected out. So highly conscientious people are going to wind up using birth control more fastidiously, and so that they will be outbred by people of low conscientiousness. And also, for example, people with lower intelligence are going to outbreed people of moderately low intelligence are going to outbreed people of high intelligence. That's going to be how that's going to work too. The highly intelligent people are going to add that IQ to their high conscientiousness, and that's a prescription for very low birth rates. Low conscientiousness, lower conscientiousness if you get sufficiently low conscientiousness and sufficiently low intelligence, people may not be able to get their act together to be very successful in mating. But if at certain levels, it's going to wind up optimizing the bell curve with respect to certain environments, and you're going to wind up with a sort of optimizing breeding rates. So you can imagine, we don't have to get personal about this. Just imagine a math program that we're actually trying to figure out, for example, within the United States. Might not even hold the profile, not hold perfectly across all states. Probably does. So probably we're going to find that, a half a standard deviation or standard deviation of below the mean, say, call it 25th percentile for conscientiousness and 25th percentile for intelligence. Probably those two things probably outbreed almost all competitive profiles where two factors are sitting, in any other pair of factors that you would put anywhere on a pair of bell curves. Those two characteristics probably at about that level optimizes human breeding rates in the United States. Now, that wouldn't be true, for example, in a harsher environment where the less intelligence and less conscientiousness would lead to less effectiveness in survival problems, and therefore we would find that the breeding rates would creep their way up those bell curves. You can imagine, in principle, environments where there would where you would see above average conscientiousness outbreeding below average. You could see where that could be true. So, but in general, system-wide, nationwide, certainly this is likely to be the case. And it is certainly not the case that the high openness people, remember, the high openness people are going to have more sex partners. So it is their conscientiousness that is going to be only when paired with high conscientiousness, would this lead to low breeding rates? So there's sort of, this person's got a vision in their head of people that are telling their parents to go to hell, and I'm not going to do what you want. I'm not going to settle down here in Mayville, and I'm not going to have 6 children like my brothers and sisters. But what you're really seeing there is a specific individual who's conscientious enough not to get pregnant, open enough to leave, and disagreeable enough to not follow the party line. So that's a specific individual they're describing rather than a general a societal trend. The trend would be as I've described.